All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your location. I know we've got a pretty diversified group out there. Thank you for joining us for today's Big Data Thought Leadership webinar entitled The Secrets of Analytical Leaders, Insights from Information Insiders. As a housekeeping issue, we'll take questions via the chat tool and go over the Q&A at the end, but please feel free to submit your questions via the WebEx chat tool down on your right side. You can send us a question to the entire group, all the attendees and the panelists, or if you'd like some privacy, you can select the panelist drop-down and send your questions to me and our guest speaker only. So my name is David Morris. I'll be our host and moderator for today's webinar. One question that I often get is, what is the Big Data Thought Leadership webinar series? And what it is a webinar series that offers expert insights into big data related topics. It's a monthly webinar series which is structured to deliver relevant and valuable information on big data topics, and to create a library of these topics for everybody to access. What this webinar isn't is a product or a sales pitch, although we'll be happy to give you one of those also, but this is not the right place. So that's kind of the housekeeping there. You have my information there to contact me if you have any feedback about this webinar specifically, or if you have want a speaker or a specific topic for us to cover in the future. So today, our big data thought leader is very well known in the industry, Wayne Eckerson. He is president of the BI Leaders Consulting. He is an author, and today his recently released book is our webinar topic today. I think we're going to be in for quite a treat. Looking at Wayne's background, Wayne has been a thought leader in the business intelligence, analytics, and big data field since the early 1990s. He's conducted numerous research studies and is a noted speaker, blogger, and consultant. He's author of 2 widely read books, Performance Dashboards, Measuring, Monitoring, and Managing Your Business, which is a very good text. And today's text, his new book, The Secrets of Analytical Leaders, Insights from Information Insiders. For many years, Wayne served as the Director of Education and Research at the Data Warehousing Institute, TDWI, where he oversaw the company's content and training programs and chaired its BI Executive Summit, a research and education service geared to directors of business intelligence and analytical programs and their teams, offering regular briefings on emerging industry technology and trends. As a consultant, Wayne provides advice and assistance to both users and vendor organizations and conducts in-house workshops on numerous topics on business intelligence, big data, and analytics. Wayne also writes a popular weekly blog called Wayne's World of BI that highlights best practices in the application of business intelligence, analytics, and big data. So we'd like to give a big warm welcome to Wayne. Thank you for joining us today.
David, thank you much. It's great to be here with you, and thanks for giving me this opportunity, and I welcome everyone who's on the line.
So,
I had a lot of... Okay.
I do have a question. Could Garth not make it today?
I'm sorry, could who?
Could Garth not make it today? It's back to your Wayne's World, Wayne and Garth. That's okay.
Garth, I'm sorry. A little out of context.
Well, so in your latest book here, I mean, you've really had a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I mean, you've went and talked to the movers and shakers in big data analytics, the guys that are leading the industry today. So as we look at this, a couple of questions I have for you is, what was your experience like with these guys, and who did you meet with, and what did you really learn, in writing your new book?
Well, I've been very fortunate over the years to meet and talk with and many bright people, many successful BI professionals, and I've gotten to where I am today basically by standing on their shoulders One of them, Eric Colson, who was at Netflix at the time, he approached me and said, Wayne, I've got all these great ideas. And I said, yes, you do. I know I'll never have time to write them down, so would you like to write a book with me? And I thought for a bit, well, that sounds like a great idea. And then I thought a little bit more and realized, there are a lot of bright people like Eric who've done some tremendous things in the industry. And a lot of them I saw in action because I invited them to speak at the summits that I ran at TDWI. So I thought, I can not only write a book for Eric, I can write a lot of other people's books as well and capture the secrets to their success. And so that's kind of the origin of the book. I ended up interviewing about 15 of these people, most of them who are in director level or above positions running BI, data warehousing, and analytics. And then I winnowed it down to about 7 people in the end. And those are the folks that I did comprehensive interviews with. Interestingly, I only asked them one question, which was, what are the 3 to 5 secrets to the success of running to your success, or the keys to running a successful analytics program? And that spawned long conversations, and I distilled what they told me down into the book, which has 3 parts. The first is kind of context setting. The second part's what I call the soft stuff, the people, process, and organization. And the third part is the hard stuff, the tools, the technology, and the architecture. I only call it hard because it's technical, but when you talk to these leaders, as tech-savvy as they are, what they really wanted to discuss was the soft stuff, because for them, that was the key to success or failure, was mastering the people, process, and the organization. So a lot of the interesting insights and stories are in that second section of the book. But anyway, why don't I let you meet these folks, unless you have other questions, David?
No, I think we're good. I'd love to hear about who you met with.
Okay. Now I'm trying to move the slides here. There we go. So here are the 7 people I ended up profiling in the book. And by profiling, I didn't paraphrase what they said. I actually quoted them directly. And so it's their words, and then I interleaved my perspectives around their ideas. In fact, I basically wrote an introduction to each chapter and then let them have their say on it. Each chapter is essentially a question that steps someone through a methodology of how to do analytics and BI from A to Z. But anyway, these are the folks. Dan Kelly is at Kelly Blue Book, ran the data warehousing program, and now is in charge of all valuation analytics there. And these were his 3 keys to success. And in essence, he's really about applying agile techniques to delivering BI and data warehousing capabilities. And he firmly believes that creating strong teams and building leaders on those teams is the key to success. Amy O'Connor is all about change management. She was brought into Nokia, which itself is undergoing tremendous change, moving from a maker of cell phones to a maker of or distributor of data services. That's where they see their future. And Amy's job is to help transform the data culture in Nokia by leveraging Hadoop to the hilt. So she talks a lot about how to change culture and behavior and attitudes. Darren Taylor's interesting story, classic data warehousing story that morphed into an analytics story that on both counts eventually succeeded, and then the executive team, in a fit of enlightenment, decided to turn this thing inside out and start selling services to it. They created a for-profit subsidiary, and now instead of a cost center, their data warehouse and analytics capabilities are a profit center. Eric Colson's the guy I mentioned from Netflix, who's now at another company. Very out-of-the-box thinker. Netflix competes on velocity, and his whole kind of theme as head of analytics and BI was that agile techniques are actually too slow. And so he came up with other techniques that are embodied in this concept called a spanner, where one person builds the entire BI solution from gathering requirements to doing the data model to ETL BI, reporting to testing. He believes that's really the way to go. You not only deliver things faster, but you deliver things better. Tim Leonard, a classic IT guy, was hired in at U.S. Express, a regional shipping company, as CTO to turn that IT department around. It was kind of disparaged, discouraged, demoralized. No one in the business wanted to work with them. And Tim, who was an ex-Marine, I believe, he cut his teeth in Iraq building data marts for Norman Schwarzkopf, took his team on a so-called death march where they built this small app that would monitor the idle time of the truck drivers, something that the executive team had wanted for decades. And they built it in 6 weeks, when normally it would have taken 6 months. And that galvanized the whole program. It turned everything around, enabled the IT department and the BI team in particular to start becoming partners with the business, helped them gain credibility, and then they were a sought-after resource after that. Kurt Thurling is the one statistician in the group. He has a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois, and his first job out of there, he helped develop the first commercial data mining software called Darwin out of the old Thinking Machines, which is a supercomputing company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I tried really hard to get him to talk about best practices in creating analytical models, and I thought he was going to talk all about algorithms and things like that, but he actually wanted to talk about two things primarily. One was the importance of curating the data, getting the data ready so that analysts and statisticians could actually do something without having to track down what data is correct or not, and which is valid and which is going to deliver highly accurate results. So he was all about the data on one hand, and on the other, once the models produced, he was all about managing those models. He spent a lot of time at Capital One, whose whole business was driven by marketing models. And they had a lot of regulations that applied to these models. So he actually was instrumental in helping SAS and SPSS develop model management capabilities in their software. He built all that stuff manually at Capital One and worked with those vendors to incorporate those capabilities into their tools. Ken Rudin, perhaps, is the most interesting guy in the book. He came up with all these nifty little aphorisms that encapsulate best practices and how to do BI and analytics, and really how to change the culture of a company to an analytics-driven company, which is what Zynga really was. As Ken said, it was a gaming company, online gaming company, masquerading as I'm sorry, got that reversed. It's an analytics company masquerading as an online gaming company. So he had little quotes like, focus on questions, not answers, focus on impacts, not insights, be evangelists, not oracles. And we'll touch on some of his aphorisms in this presentation. So those are the analytical leaders. And I call them purple people because they do one really, really important thing. They bridge the gulf between business and technology. And I call them purple because when they're not blue in the business, they're not red in IT, but they're a perfect blend of both. And when you blend blue and red, you get purple, hence purple people. So one of the things that they do real well is talk the language of business. Even though they're very technical folks, they know how to speak to the business people in their terms, how to present technology options in terms that business people can understand. And this was actually a difficult thing for Tim Leonard at U.S. Express to learn. He was a classic IT guy, and he realized over a period of many years that he had been banging his head against the wall whenever he talked with business folks. He realized, you just can't talk speeds and feeds and architectures and tools because the business people's eyes glaze over. So he decided to change, and whenever he went into a new environment, and he does some consulting as well, he decided just to listen and learn the business and wait until he was conversant with their issues and their jargon. And when he finally spoke, he knew he was on the right track when the business people would turn to him and say, "Are you in IT?" As if they weren't sure. And that's when Tim knew that he actually had them and that he could partner with them instead of being, in some cases, what most IT departments are, which are adversaries. All these guys ran their analytical teams or BI teams as businesses, where end users are customers, reports are products, the data warehouse is a factory and an assembly line to be managed.
Okay, why?
One of the more interesting concepts came from Mike Machendow, Director of BI at Dow, who's not in the book, but was one of the guys I did interview. Was he tracks something, he tracks market share, and he defines market share as the percentage of insights that business people glean from corporate-derived reports and dashboards, as opposed to insights and decisions made from spread marks, data shadow systems. And his goal is to actually get an 80-20 ratio, 80% of decisions made from corporate standard information, 20% from spread marks. Because he doesn't think spread marks are all that bad. In many ways, they are instantiations of business requirements and represent the next generation of requirements and data that needs to go into the warehouse. What these people all do really well is recruit business people to work with them. Either they just outright hire folks who have business experience, or they recruit internally and pull financial analysts or sales analysts or marketing analysts onto their teams. And if you think about it, what better way to bridge this gap between the business and technology teams than to bring a business person in who understands the jargon, who knows the people, knows the issues, and has the credibility. That increases the ability of the technical teams to really foster a rich and fruitful dialogue with the business when you recruit people from the business. And one of the unique things about the folks in my book, and one of the requirements for actually being in the book, was that they managed both front and back offices. In other words, they had end-to-end control of the analytical environment. So they managed both the data warehouse, the BI, reporting development, as well as analytics, and sometimes even big data environments as well. And that's why I have this picture of Bill Belichick here. He's the coach of the New England Patriots, my hometown team. When he came to the Patriots in 2000, he did kind of an unusual thing at the time, which was he said, "I'm not just going to be football coach. I'm going to also be, if you want me, to be a general manager of football operations," which meant that he controlled everything that had to do with, fielding a team, from not just coaching and diagramming X's and O's, but also recruiting the players, recruiting the coaches, setting the schedules, and all kinds of things like that. So having that end-to-end control really empowers these leaders with one vision and also power to actually get things done. In some cases, these folks had control over the operational systems, which is really powerful because then you can start to integrate those systems and make sure that they're not getting out of sync, so that the data that the operational teams send down is consumable without too much effort and cost by the analytical teams. This is the analytical success framework that I came up with and that I put in the book. Many different layers: culture, people, organization, process, architecture, which includes tools, and data. I'm actually creating a 2-day workshop that kind of steps through each of these layers. In our industry, it's interesting that we usually focus, I should say most of the press and most of the attention is focused on the two inner rings, the architecture and the data, some of the process, but very little attention is paid to the culture, people, and the organization. And when I talk to these analytical leaders, they were definitely focused on the culture, people, and organization. They wanted the best tools. Sometimes they got them, sometimes they didn't. that didn't seem to be as big an obstacle as getting the right people and organizing them in the right way and establishing a culture in which analytics can thrive. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to kind of cherry pick one slide from this workshop that I've created from each of these layers, just to give you a taste of what's in the book, as well as some of the other things that I've come across over the years. So Ken Rudin, he really, as I said earlier, he was a master at creating an analytical culture. And he had this one aphorism called be an evangelist, not an oracle. When he came to Zynga, I think it was like 5 or 7 years ago, he's now at, by the way, he's now at Facebook as director of analytics, probably the biggest analytics job in the world, given the amount of data they're sitting on. And also, you know, before I even finished writing the book, 6 of the 7 analytical leaders had changed jobs, either inside the company or had moved to another company, which posed a little problem for me, but also shows that at this level, when you're successful, you're in high demand. But anyway, when Ken first came to Zynga, all the analysts sat together and they reported to him, and he kind of viewed them as oracles. So if the business had an issue that they thought could be resolved with an analysis done by his team, they would walk over and submit their request, and the analytical team would then work on it. And Ken thought, you know, I don't really like that dynamic. I don't think the business should have to come to us like we're an oracle that, you know, that will deliver answers from on high in response to queries. So he did a very radical thing, which was he gave up all his direct reports. He gave all his team members, all his analysts, to the department heads. And he made those guys sit with the department and be members of their team. And he said they have they have a couple of jobs, but the primary job was whenever someone in the design studio had an idea, and these were all creative types, right? Had a lot of ideas, and they would try a lot of them, and some would succeed, and most would fail. He said, your job as an analyst is to say, oh, that's a great idea, let's test it. And they built an A/B testing platform to test all these ideas out on a sample of customers on their website. So the cycle that you see here comes from a book called The Power of Habit by Charles Dewey, one of the best books I've read in a long time. Talks a little bit about the neuroscience of habits, and then some great examples of individuals and organizations changing those habits. And in an organization, habits are really what's defined as culture. And he also talks about the habit cycle, which is very simple. There's a cue, there's a routine, the thing that you actually do, and then the reward you get from doing the routine. So what Ken did is he essentially created a new habit cycle for his analysts. So the cue was anytime someone had an idea, they were to raise their hand and say, let's test it, and then the test would reveal the lift or lack of lift. And so the reward was eventually, when they hit on the right idea, gains for the business and satisfaction for having done a good job. So that was pretty interesting to actually embed the analyst into the business. But Ken didn't stop there, because he discovered a lot of his analysts were actually very bright people and creating wonderful insights. Sometimes interesting dashboards or analytical models, detecting fraud or other things like that. And a lot of times Ken realized that these insights had no chance in hell of ever being adopted by the business for one reason or another, but they were more like intellectual exercises. So Ken started talking about insights without impact are useless. And he would repeat this mantra to his analysts, but he found that just telling them that, well, what's the point? What's the impact on the business? How's the business going to use this? Are they going to use this? Wasn't enough. So he did something even more radical. He changed the incentive system or the bonus structure for the analysts. So they used to get essentially incented by the quality of the insights they generated. And Ken thought, that's kind of backward, because if the insights don't move the business needle, then they're kind of useless. What's the point? So he changed the incentives to be aligned with the business team's incentives. In other words, whatever goals that the business had to achieve that quarter or that year, those were the same goals that the analysts were to achieve. Of course, the analysts didn't like this at all. They pushed back, and their argument was kind of logical. It's like, well, we can bring a horse to water. We can come up with great insights, but we can't make it drink. In other words, if they don't adopt those insights, then there's no way we can get our bonus. Ken said, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense, but think about a salesperson. A salesperson can say all the right things, call on all the right people, distribute all the right collateral, but if they don't get the sale, guess what? They don't get a commission. So eventually, Ken got his way and imposed this the structure on the analysts, and they had to spend a lot of time now thinking about, well, what will really drive player retention, which is a big issue at Zynga, and what will really reduce customer attrition. What things can we do as analysts to really move the needle on those two key metrics? And every quarter they would get together to figure out what things they would do to help the business achieve its goals. And a funny thing happened on the way to this new paradigm, which was the analysts actually ended up enjoying this because they could see, especially when the business achieved its goals, exactly how they contributed to the organization. They just weren't in an ivory tower anymore dreaming up wonderful insights. They were actually making things happen. And they knew exactly what value they were contributing to the organization. So as a result, they became more engaged, more passionate, and real partners. And in fact, a lot of analysts ended up contributing ideas for games that ended up as new features. So Ken really succeeded in changing the culture at Zynga, making it much more analytics-driven. Okay, so that was the culture. Now we're moving on to people here. And one of the things I've been talking a lot about lately is that there's really two major elements to BI, two major movements, if you will. There's a top-down business intelligence and there's a bottom-up intelligence. And these are two very different worlds with two different architectures with required different tools, and they're really geared to different types of users. Top-down really is more IT-driven, data warehousing-oriented. The purpose is to deliver reports and dashboards to casual users so they can monitor existing business processes. So in other words, you know what questions you want to ask, and then you create reports to answer those questions. The bottom-up world is the exact opposite. You have no idea what you're going to look into from day to day. You don't know what data you're going to need to answer those questions. It's all ad hoc. It's all exploratory. If you have a warehouse that has all the subject areas fully fleshed out, then that might work for analysts, but typically it's not enough. So very, very different environment. So the development, the people who actually build things in these two environments are very different, as you can imagine. So in the top-down environment, we have our classic business intelligence and data warehousing team. And these folks are typically centralized, typically managed within the IT department. Ideally, they should be carved out of the IT department, at least some of them. And they go through the typical development process of gathering requirements and then building the ETL maps and the data models and the reports, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, in the bottom-up world, there are these analysts. And ideally, like Ken Rudin discovered at Zynga, they're best embedded into the departments that they're serving. And there's 4 different types of analysts. There's super users, business analysts, statisticians, data scientists, and then data analysts. Super users are actually, technically, they probably sit between top-down and bottom-up world. They're really business users who glom onto a BI tool when it's first distributed. They really like it, and they become the go-to people in each department to get ad hoc reports created. The business analysts are those Excel jockeys, MBA types, who are hired by departmental folks typically to build plans and custom reports and things. Then you have your statisticians and data scientists. To me, a data scientist is really just a statistician who knows how to write Java and access Hadoop. And then you have your data analyst, who's kind of the guy who gets the data in order so that the analysts can do their jobs without spending half the week just playing IT manager, finding the right data, massaging it so that they can analyze it. So a data analyst, and this is something that Kurt Thurling harped on a lot, was that data analyst is kind of like the librarian for the analytical team, and you need someone to play that role so that the statisticians can be more productive and focus on what they do best, which is modeling data. Now, there's a big problem that typically happens in most BI environments where the BI data warehousing developers, when they gather requirements, they go talk to the analysts because they're the biggest users of data, right? But when they ask analysts what data they need, what do the analysts typically say? Well, they typically say, yeah, I want all of it. Because they really don't know what they're going to look at from day to day. So they essentially view the BI data warehousing environment as a big data dump. You know, the BI tool is just a giant ETL tool to pull data into their preferred analytical tool, either Excel or Access or SAS or SPSS. So the folks in the top-down world, the developers, really need to ask casual users what data they want. And of course, when they do that, the casual users, the people who need information to do their jobs, like executives, managers, frontline workers, customers, suppliers, when asked that question, you all know what they say, which is, I don't know, or I'll only know when I see it, which makes developing reports and dashboards kind of difficult to do and requires a different methodology. And Agile fits really nicely into this kind of development environment. So anyway, the folks, the analytical leaders in the book, spend a lot of time talking about these different types of people, how to organize them, how to manage them, how to motivate them. But it's very clear that it's very distinct groups, and you have to manage them separately. In terms of the organization, I decided not to present the org chart of the BICC, which I normally do, but just talk about some principles that the leaders talked about. One key was, hire the right people, and for them, the right people were those who had technical expertise, baseline technical skills, but also came with strong business knowledge and emotional IQ. Ken Rudin said, I just need analysts who can actually communicate. When they have an insight that can impact the business, they have to be able to stand up and make a real persuasive argument why the business should adopt it. So he looks for folks who have a combination of analytical skills, business skills, and good interpersonal skills. And a lot of people ask me, how do I make a career here? What's the right path? And I say, well, you need those three skills if you want to succeed, and then you'll be invaluable forever. Darren Taylor talked, and some others talked a lot about aligning people with their natural strengths. Darren had a number of instances where he had people in the wrong positions. He tells the story of one guy who was in production support, essentially maintaining applications and solutions that had already been built. He was a star performer for 15 years. And then to kind of reward him for his work, they promoted him into a different position, and that was to do long-term strategic planning and development. And subsequently, the guy failed miserably and almost got fired. So Darren Taylor is a big believer in this book called Strengths Finder that It's put out by the Gallup organization, which helps you assess the core natural strengths that people bring to the job. Instead of trying to force fit people into the wrong positions, which is oftentimes happens when you try to promote someone from a technical skill into a management position, you really want to put people where they're naturally good. And he seems to think that is a very key element in succeeding and having strong teams. Practice the principle of proximity. That's what Ken Rudin did at Zynga when he gave up all of his direct reports and embedded his analysts into the business units. And when Marissa Mayer, the new CEO of Yahoo, decided everyone had to come to work, I knew exactly where she's coming from, because when people are able to rub elbows and bump into each other in the hallways and overhear conversations, you're so much more productive. You don't have to schedule meetings that to get things done. Things get done almost by osmosis when people work in the same room as each other. So Dan Engel at Kelley Blue Book, he has his analysts and his data warehousing developers work in the same room. In fact, the analysts, the guys at Kelley Blue Book who actually published the automobile values, they spend upwards of 80% of their time sitting with the data warehousing developers. It's not that the data warehousing developers go sit with them. It's the opposite pathway. The analysts are eager to go sit with the developers because they know they're building stuff that they're going to use and want to have some input. A lot of folks talked about empowering people to build complete solutions. Again, Dan Engel at Kelley Blue Book built agile teams and empowered those teams to build complete solutions. Eric Colson at Netflix took this one step further, as I said earlier, and empowered individuals in very narrow business domains to build complete solutions. And the idea there is that you're more vested as a developer when you can see, the total impact of your work. You're not just a cog in a huge assembly line, and you're just, heads down with the blinders on, only doing your little role, not knowing how what you do affects everything else in this larger solution. People are more productive, they're more engaged, they're more passionate when they're building complete solutions. It's important to build teamwork and trust, whether you're using agile teams or spanners who do have to collaborate intensively with each other to coordinate and sync up their changes. Dan Engel spends a lot of, in fact, they have a whole curriculum that's now run by the HR department about building teamwork and building trust among team members. And one of the things that he requires his agile teams to do is engage in a mutual 360-degree review, where all the team members sit around a table and they have to write down the strengths and weaknesses of each other and then present them to the group, which is terrifying to receive and terrifying to deliver. But what it does, among other things, is kind of break down these defenses that we all bring to work and forces us to admit our strengths and our weaknesses and be vulnerable to a group, which tends to bond the group together and make them more effective and efficient in what they do. And finally, Dan also talks about the importance of allowing teams to fail, giving them the freedom to fail, because that's where they really learn. He said his first Scrum team, which he was the Scrum Master, was going haywire, and his boss got really concerned that the team wasn't going to hit its goals. And his boss came to him with a very worried look on his face and said, Dan, what are you going to do? This team is going to fail. And Dan turned to him and smiled and said, nothing. And the team failed. And one of the great things about the Scrum methodology is that they have a retrospective that happens at the end of every sprint, where you're supposed to review what went right and what went wrong, and learn how to make it better. So continuous improvement. And Dan says now, today, that team, because of that early experience, they're now the most productive team in the organization. So you got to allow people room to fail because that's where they learn. I think as parents we probably have to confront this dilemma. We don't want our kids to fail, but yet in many ways, if we allow them the freedom to fail, that's where they really learn. That's where they really mature and grow up. Same thing in business. In terms of process, the overarching theme of the book was deliver value fast. It's the only way to gain credibility and momentum. If you don't have credibility in the business, you're just not going to go anywhere. Business won't want to partner with you. So the only way you can get the business on your side is to deliver value, and do it fast and do it continuously. So all the leaders spoke about this. So Kurt Thurling, in one of his consulting companies that he worked for, he said, and for all the clients that he works for and does work for, the key is to answer a meaningful question quickly. So at one of his companies, when he first arrived, the COO didn't really know how many employees worked at the company, and that kind of was a source of angst toward the guy. So Kurt and another fellow spent 2 weeks and pulled together some data into a little data mart. It was not a standardized or architecturally accepted type of environment, but they knew they needed to answer this question, and they did, and that bred other questions from other executives, like how many people are we paying on our payroll that actually don't work for the company anymore? And they actually discovered, by expanding this little data mart, that there were a number of people who fit that description. So one valuable question or important question, or as Kurt says, a meaningful question that gets answered spawns many other questions. And basically it's like a snowball that rolls down a hill and gains in size and momentum. And that's really what you need with a quick win. Darren Taylor talks about how when you're engaged in a big infrastructure project like building a data warehouse, you have to deliver value along the way, even if that means taking away some of your development resources to build something on the side that will show business people the potential value of this infrastructure that you're building. So when he was building out the warehouse, he actually allocated a number of his folks to build a physician portal, which was something that folks had wanted for a long time. And since they had finished the claims subject area in the warehouse, they built this, and it enabled physicians and hospitals for the first time to access online all the claims that were outstanding with Blue KC. And then when they were building out the analytics infrastructure, they did the same thing. They built an executive dashboard on an iPad just to give the executives a sense that this infrastructure investment was going to pay handsome dividends. I talked about Tim Leonard and his death march at U.S. Express. When they succeeded with that first small dashboard, they were then overwhelmed with requests from all the department heads who wanted a piece of the action. But that was when he was able to then negotiate bonus structure for his team, higher salaries if they hit performance goals, and training dollars. Talk about Dan Engel and Agile Techniques, and Eric with his spanners, which is always gets people kind of flush in the face because they don't see how it could possibly work. And it doesn't work in every environment to have one person build an entire solution in a very narrow area. You have to have the right culture to do that kind of thing, and the right people. In terms of architecture, one of the things I've noticed is that we've tried to shoehorn all of our reporting and analysis applications into a single architecture, which is the data warehouse and the BI architecture. And we've always had this competing architecture and intelligence called analytics intelligence, which is in the blue at the bottom. And now we have two other environments, I call them intelligences, with different tools and different architectures and sometimes different users. Continuous intelligence is one, and the other is content intelligence, going after all the unstructured and semi-structured data. These are all serving slightly different audiences with slightly different architectures and tools, but they're all really doing the same thing, which is using information to make smarter decisions and tactically building either reporting applications or analysis applications. So the top half of this framework is basically that top-down world that I talked about earlier. And you can see it's really all about monitoring existing business processes for casual users using dashboards and reports. And the bottom half of this framework is really all about exploration for power users. And there's some interesting, at the intersection of each of these intelligence is really a ripe area for innovation and development, particularly between analytics intelligence and continuous intelligence, where you have the ability to start automating decisions in well-known processes. So that was the framework. This is the actual architecture that represents that framework. You can see we still have that top-down, bottom-up division. Everything in blue is that traditional top-down, BI-driven, IT-driven data warehousing environment. Everything in pink is what's new. So we have new sources, semi-structured, unstructured. We have machine-generated data that's driving a streaming or CEP, complex event processing engine, that will essentially correlate events on the fly and send alerts, kick off workflows for people who are monitoring those things. You have a Hadoop cluster that sits in front of the warehouse that's a repository, or some would say a staging area for all this new type of data that organizations are collecting and want to do something with. Below the warehouse, you have what I call a freestanding analytical sandbox or platform. This could be one of these newfangled appliances where you might replicate some or all the data in the warehouse and put it in these high-powered, parallelized, column-based in-memory systems and let your analysts go crazy on them. Or you may use them to support all the new semi-structured and unstructured data. You also have virtual sandboxes inside the warehouse. So these are partitions just for analysts, so they don't create the spread marts that you don't know about. The idea here is to let them create spread marts inside the warehouse using standardized, sanitized corporate data that they can mix with their own data that they've uploaded into their little partition or sandbox. And that's something that eBay has popularized quite a bit. And then there are this new class of BI tools, the visual discovery tools. I just wrote a very large report on this class of tools that originally started out as just analyst tools to go visualize and explore data in memory at the speed of thought. Now these tools are also being used to publish dashboards to casual users in the top-down world. So they actually do a really good job of straddling both top-down and bottom-up worlds, which makes them probably the best type of self-service BI tools out there, which is why they're getting a lot of play these days. They meet the needs of both power users and casual users. However, there are many instances where these things hit the scalability or complexity wall and need to be kind of reinvented in more of a traditional top-down environment. This is the landscape for BI tools, the front end of the whole BI data warehousing equation. This just came out of that visual discovery report I mentioned. And what's interesting is there's 9 segments of BI tools here, and you probably should have a tool, a standard for each of these segments. Although a lot of the BI vendors now have these integrated tool sets that encompass most of these segments. So you only have to really buy one tool from one vendor. And then you have to weigh whether you're getting all-in-one or best of breed, but that's a different discussion. What I want to point out here is we still have that top-down, bottom-up line, as you can see, that divides casual users from power users and the types of functionality that both typically require. And then the third dimension is scope. So you can see that the two biggest segments here are relational OLAP, which has been the traditional BI tool in the top-down world that provides reporting as well as a degree of analysis at an enterprise level. And the other big competitor are these new visual discovery tools that I just mentioned. That 2 years ago, that oval was probably half the size, but it's grown. This whole market segment has grown significant, and it's encompassed and subsumed desktop analysis tools and most of the MOLAP tools. And it's pushing strongly into dashboard environments as well as big data analytics environments to the right. So it'll be interesting to see who wins this fight, whether it's ROLAP or visual discovery, or this is kind of they're going to achieve some degree of stasis at this point. And then finally, on the data side, I could talk about data cleansing, data quality, data governance, which are all important issues, but obviously the big term these days is big data. And this is a little quiz I usually give folks, but you can see the answer is already there. What is big data? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But in my perspective, big data is about the data, the 3 V's, as Gartner says, volume, variety, and velocity. It's also about the systems that run big data. So there's a lot of new, high-powered, parallelized, in-memory systems out there that are making quite a splash in the marketplace. So when you talk to vendors, they're typically thinking about systems when they mention big data. And then what a lot of people don't realize is that big data really is a movement. And it kind of represents the collision between the process world and the data world, between guys who build apps using SQL and guys who build apps using procedural code like Java, Perl, and Python. And if you went to some of the early big data shows like I did, you realize that someone who's been in the data space using commercialized software that runs on SQL and relational databases, you're quite the outsider at these events, where most of the people are walking around barefoot with T-shirts and ponytails. And you realize, these are Java developers who've outgrown MySQL and need something more powerful to run their web-based applications. And they don't like SQL, they don't like relational, they want to code everything. And, Hadoop was the right tool at the right time for this audience to kind of gravitate onto the world of data that I've known and lived in for the last 20 years. Now, Hadoop, which is kind of their tool of choice, as well as these NoSQL databases, have a lot of new things to offer to the traditional world of SQL-based data management. Particularly, it's become the standardized way to deal with unstructured and semi-structured data, which, frankly, we've never really had a good answer for in the relational world. And also, they've reduced the cost of acquiring and loading data, which is quite an expensive activity in the relational world because you have to extract, transform, and model data before you can load it. So a little bit of agility on the back end in terms of getting data in. The problem there today is getting the data out. You need these very expensive experts called data scientists to get the data out. Fortunately, we're seeing this space evolve very quickly, and a lot of vendors creating higher-level languages like Pig and Hive and even SQL-based interfaces to this world of unstructured, semi-structured Hadoop data. That allows everyone else who's been in the big data world, or I should say the SQL-based data world, to access this new type of data. So what is the definition of big data? Well, it's all those things. So that's really all I had to present today. I've kind of been talking for almost an hour here, so it's time I shut up. The book.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the book, obviously you can get it at Amazon.com, and in summary, the key themes were from the book were deliver value fast, don't underestimate change management. Ultimately, what you do as an analytical leader is manage change, and one of the best ways to do that is hire the right people, point them in the right direction, give them a lot of latitude to exercise their own judgment. Create agile data warehouses, and it's all about the data in the end. Well, it's all about the people first, and then the data. Those are the two biggest challenges in creating a successful analytics program. Okay, so that's it. David, back to you.
Well, absolutely. Thank you. And one of the things that I liked in the book, I know we did the high-level overview, but you have a lot of and I like stories and real stories of how people handled the situations, and there's quite a number of those throughout the book that give very specific, here's what happened, here's how we handled it, that I think is really good and gives a lot of insight into how people are coming in and deploying this and these technologies. So before we go to questions, I know we're coming up on the hour, and I think this is exceptionally valuable. We'll come back to questions in a minute, but I'll close out with a couple housekeeping things. The first one is Big Data Republic is running a top most influential big data Twitters in the top 100. Both Wayne and I have been nominated as influential big data Twitters, and we work very hard for that, and very, very honored, especially with the luminaries that are on that list, as well as Cetas and a couple of my coworkers, Karthik Kanan and Rakash Nair. If you so choose, and in light what we presented today, our past webinars and also our future webinars and our Twitter, feel free to take the text there that is just right of that blue arrow, and you can tweet that with the relevant Twitter handle and vote for Wayne or myself or some other one of your choosing and participate in that poll. I think it's exceptionally valuable. A lot of great guys on there. If you click on the bit.ly link there, which I'll copy it over here so that you can copy and paste in the chat tool, which I just did, you can go in and read about the poll and so forth. So we'd appreciate you doing that. We'll jump past the questions right now, but next month's Big Data Thought webinar is Bob Hayes. He's just written a book, which ironically comes out on the 17th of April, which is the day we're doing the webinar. I think this is his fourth or fifth book. It's based on total customer experience, building business through customer-centric measurement and analytics. And this is really taking how people are now taking big data and relating that through customer experiences to build a better business. And so that you can get to those webinars on cetas.net/webinars, which will be all our past webinars, recordings, as well as our future ones. If you have and want to submit a speaker that you would like to hear from or a topic, please email me. My email is there at the bottom, dmorris@vmware.com, for any other feedback that you have. Cetas sponsors the webinar series. This is big data and informational. We have a free trial on our website, so if you need the analytical tool that you'd like to try, there's a free trial there. And we'll go back, take a few questions, those that can hang with us. We appreciate it. I know we're right at the top of the hour, but if you can, we'll keep recording this, and you can check back with the recording, and then we'll reach out and answer any of the questions directly that we haven't gotten to by the close here. So one of the questions that came up, Wayne, is what's the difference between big data and business intelligence, which is a question I think you probably get quite often.
Right. I have a slide that I didn't present that shows the evolution of, well, pick whatever name you want, whatever you want to call what it takes to move from data to insights to action. And over the years, that's been called data warehousing back in the early 90s, business intelligence in the late 90s, performance management in the early 2000s, and now analytics or big data, or what I like to say is big data analytics, because data by itself has no value. It's only when you analyze it and act on it that it has any value. So to me, business intelligence and big data are really just kind of umbrella terms that describe that data to insights to action workflow. Business intelligence today kind of has this connotation of BI tools, just the front-end tools, reporting analysis tools, more IT-oriented. And certainly back in the 90s, we were more focused on the IT stuff, creating the data infrastructure, and then getting tools that could point at this repository we created that we call the data warehouse. So we've moved away. Well, those things you still have to do. I mean, that's kind of the foundation for big data analytics. It's not that you can't do analytics without that data warehousing and BI foundation, but you won't get too far until you go back and really start to manage your data, manage your facts and dimensions, and standardize on things. And that kind of hard roll up your sleeve work still has to be done. And a lot of people don't like to do that, and they'd rather bypass it.
Right.
And a lot of times that comes back to bite them. I mean, you can implement stuff in pockets without a strong enterprise data foundation, but you'll never be able to cross functional boundaries if you don't go and create a suitable data foundation.
Right. Okay. And one of the questions that actually came out of or input here is, and I think it's more on the technology side, so I'll reframe it a bit, but I think looking at your book, as well as probably throughout your career, you've seen that a shift in technologies, and the question is, how pervasive is the use of Hadoop at these new companies that you wrote about at the book? I'm assuming some of them had the traditional BI architecture with maybe the new platforms on top of it, or some of them are just only the new, kind of the new technology Hadoop-based platforms. What have you seen from a technology standpoint throughout your career and in writing the book?
Well, I guess at a high level, I've never seen anything hyped more than big data, except for maybe artificial intelligence. So as a result, I'm seeing this silver bullet phenomenon happening where people think Hadoop is the answer to all their problems, particularly if they have any unstructured or semi-structured data they feel they need Hadoop. And that's not necessarily true. You want to avoid Hadoop right now, if at all possible, because it's so immature. Unless your organization and your BI or your technical team love to live on the leading edge of stuff, then I might wait a little bit. At the same time, I am seeing a lot of organizations adopt Hadoop for the right reasons, and I think the adoption curve is really accelerating fast, and the technology is evolving really fast. So it is something you need to keep on your radar screen if you're not already doing it, and become conversant with kind of the jargon, because it is different. In many ways, it feels like we're recreating what we've done the last 20 years, but in a whole new environment, file-based system as opposed to relational system. And, back in the early 90s.
Yeah, I was about to say, that actually goes right into one of the next questions we have, which one of the things, it draws me back to an analogy of, if everybody remembers, and this is really dating me, Top Gun, right, where speed is life in the airplane world and the fighter jets. And I think when I start looking at some of the speed at which data now is being analyzed, when some of the Hadoop clusters and things, how fast they've become, there is a lot of competition now, seemingly, to get to the information and get to an answer first, right? And that is where a competitive advantage is significant in some of these companies. I know in some of the large retailers and things like that that are deploying these technologies. What is your view on that?
Well, I think analytics and using information to make smarter decisions is probably the last great wave of competitive advantage. I mean, you think about it, what we're building is intelligence with these tools and technologies and data. And that's something you really can't commoditize. You can only cut costs so much. Innovation can only happen so fast, but making smarter decisions, I mean the value in that is immense. I do see people racing, like I mentioned the silver bullet phenomenon. And one of the things that we said in the 90s that was the downfall of data warehousing was the sense that if we built the warehouse, they would come. and we built the warehouse. In a lot of cases, the users never came. And that's because we were so focused on the data that we didn't really understand what the business really needed. And I see that same phenomenon happening here, and it actually happened a little bit with Nokia. Their whole notion was we're going to build this huge data repository in Hadoop and put all of our data in there, all the data from all of our warehouses and marts. We're not going to get rid of those, but we're just going to create this huge repository out there and put all our web logs in there and all our, all the logs from our cell phones, and then let people build innovative new data services out of that. And they realized very quickly that the data that they threw in there, especially from web logs, which is just a really terribly dirty, convoluted set of data that was designed by developers to do testing of their code. It was not designed to enable an analysis. That they realized, oh man, we got to go back to the drawing board and really fix the way these web logs are designed, because we are spending a hell of a lot of time and money trying to squeeze something valuable out of them. So again, it all gets down to the people and the data. A lot of times the data is just this intransient, nefarious thing that, you have to wrestle with. You got to wrestle it to the ground before, it'll give you anything of value.
Right. So I'd like to thank all the attendees today again, and thank you for staying over about 10 minutes past the hour. I know that's challenging oftentimes, but I thought there was a lot of value here, and I want to thank you again, Wayne, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And you can get his book and read a lot of the detailed stories. It's available at Amazon. And our next month's webinar is, I think, going to be a great one with Dr. Bob Hayes. And we look forward to having you on our future webinar. So thank you guys very, very much. I really appreciate it. And hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.